Apparently, Insomniac is going to make Miles Morales the lead for their Spider-Man games. In other news, fire burns. So, to no one's surprise, it comes out that Insomniac is ditching Peter Parker as the lead for their Spider-Man games to be replaced by everyone's favorite token, Miles Morales. Fair warning, there will be some spoilers about the second game coming up, so you've been warned. It was obvious from the first Insomniac Spider-Man game that they were gonna drop Peter for Miles. There was really no other reason to have Miles in the game if that wasn't the intention. The team had 60 years of Spider-Man stories to use, and they could have easily done an updated version of Spider-Man's origin set in modern times. This would have given them years of games if they chose to do that. However, they didn't. They chose instead to have Peter well established as Spider-Man, having almost 10 years under the mask. That alone was the first clue that they intended to ditch Peter. The second was them adding in Miles Morales, who really had nothing to do with the actual plot, and then giving him powers and having him show them off at the end of the game. The next was a spin-off game focusing on Miles. All of that made it clear that the Spider-Man sequel was probably going to be the passing of the torch from Peter to Miles, which became apparent in the marketing for the game. Here we have the Venom arc, a major moment for Spider-Man's overall story, and yet they've shoehorned Miles into that story. He's not a part of that story, and even in the version of the Venom arc that the writers tell, switching Venom from Eddie Brock to Harry Osborn, Miles really plays no role in that. The whole arc revolves around Peter's friendship with Harry, yet Miles is randomly shoehorned into that relationship towards the end of the game. Throughout the game, Peter hints that it may be time for him to quit, which comes off as weird because this is literally the second game. Barely any time has passed since the events of the first game. The second game also questions whether Peter is even cut out to be a hero, and implies Miles is much better at it than him despite barely a year's experience. The best example of this is when Martin Lee decides to try to redeem himself. Peter says to Miles that he's never been able to get any of his enemies to reform, which runs contrary to everything about Peter as a person. It also runs contrary to the actual story, because Lee already felt guilty. All Miles did was put a face on the victims Lee regretted hurting. Ironically, Miles doesn't forgive Lee. Instead, he just lets go of his hate. Compare that to the hot mess that is Spider-Man 3. That movie is terrible, but it does have some great moments, and one of them is when Sandman confesses to killing Uncle Ben, and Peter finds the courage to forgive him. Moments like that define Spider-Man. It's the sacrifices and hard decisions that Peter makes that define his character, which in turn defines what it is to be Spider-Man. There is no Spider-Man without Peter Parker, because Spider-Man's heroics are an extension of Peter's personality and choices. Insomniac ironically shows this in the game. Peter has real problems, not just in the suit, but out of the suit. His life is jacked, almost entirely because of him being Spider-Man. The first thing we see of him is him teaching class only for Sandman to attack. Both he and Miles go out to fight, but only Peter ends up with a consequence. He loses his job for apparently ditching the kids. Does Miles or his friends, who all apparently know he's playing Spider-Man, step in to cover for Peter? Nope, they let him take the fall. Meanwhile, Miles has a relatively perfect life. Well, you know what? That's not entirely fair. While he does have a bunch of friends who all know he wears a costume, and a mother who's totally supportive of him fighting crime, he does have some problems. There's a girl he likes that he just can't bring himself to ask out. And he's got to write a bio about himself for his college application, and his mother is dating a new guy. Oh, and his uncle, the Prowler, is out of jail and might be back to his old criminal ways, all of which get neatly resolved in Miles' favor with little effort. By the way, this was the writers trying to make Miles interesting. He's so generic and boring that Harry Osborn, who's a side character, has a more interesting background and story, which I won't spoil because it's actually a good story and is one of the better parts of the game. So of course, when it came out that Insomniac is ditching Peter for Miles, there was a backlash, and on social media you got the usual suspects from both sides going, Miles Morales is Spider-Man. No, Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Miles Morales is Miles Morales. So why is there this backlash? I think it's simple. Miles Morales has been pushed from his creation to replace Peter Parker, and the reason has been solely about race. That because Peter is white, he's unrelatable, so Spider-Man needs to be race swapped so minorities can see themselves in the character. It's not about a lack of popularity, which is the usual reason for replacing the character, because Spider-Man remains popular, even after the Clone Saga One More Day and Dan Slott's run. It's not that no one likes Peter Parker or that there aren't more stories to tell with that character. I mean, the obvious story to tell is to finally let him and MJ get back together and have a kid. Of all the characters who should be dead, it's Peter. But for some reason, the powers that be at Marvel just don't want Peter and MJ back together, although they are allowing that story to be told in the Ultimate Universe. My point though is that people love Peter Parker, so there's no real weight to the claim that he's unrelatable, so there's no real reason to replace him. And make no mistake, that is the intention behind the push for Miles Morales. It's to get rid of Peter Parker, and that too is part of the backlash, because people don't like being told to like a character, and they like it even less when the character is as bland and generic as Miles, and they absolutely hate it when you're telling them to like a character based solely on that character's race. Throughout his comic book history, Miles' sole defining feature has been his race. Nothing else about him stands out, something easily proven by asking Miles Morales fans what's their favorite Miles Morales story. You wouldn't see people more stumped unless you asked them about their favorite part of ISOM. Even in the games, the writers struggle to give Miles problems on par with Peter's absolutely foobar life. Miles is over here like, my childhood friend sacrificed herself and I thought about killing Martin Lee. Meanwhile, Peter is like, dude, I'm responsible for the deaths of both my surrogate parents and my best friend. Keep in mind, the writers were actually trying to give Miles some conflict, and this was the best they could do. You can't make people like Miles Morales, and undermining Peter, retiring Peter, or killing him off isn't going to make people suddenly view Miles as a real Spider-Man. Peter defines what it is to be Spider-Man because he is Spider-Man. It's an extension of his personality and experiences. You can't just put someone else in the suit and go, what's the difference? The difference is that it's not the same guy. This isn't about hating Miles Morales, it's about loving Peter Parker. It's not the name Spider-Man that people like, it's the person, and that person is Peter Parker. That's who they connected with. That is who's a smart aleck. That's who learned the lesson the hard way, that with great power comes great responsibility. You can no more switch out Peter Parker for someone else than you could switch out Bruce Wayne for someone else. It's Bruce's tragedy that made him Batman. He is who defines what it is to be Batman because it's literally who he becomes after his parents' murder. The moment there's another person in the suit, it's no longer Batman. It's just someone playing the role. And for the people who have a hard time understanding this, remember, we're not talking about a character no one knows about. We're talking about one of the most popular characters in the world. You can't just swap them out and think everyone will be cool with it, especially not when the character is still popular, and definitely not when the only reason you want to do it is because the original character isn't the right race. And calling everyone racist for not liking Miles Morales isn't going to change that. Now, the irony of ironies is that Marvel could get Miles over by simply giving him his own identity and name and making him his own character instead of someone living under Peter's shadow. They had the opportunity to do that when they brought Miles from the Ultimate Universe into the regular Marvel Universe, but they didn't take it. They had the opportunity with the Spider-Verse films, but those are about Miles trying to find himself after jacking Peter's name and legacy. They had the opportunity with the Insomniac games, but those are about Miles trying to live up to Peter's legacy. If you want people to like Miles Morales, stop trying to define him based on another character's experiences. Let him be his own character with his own name, his own rogues gallery, and his own real, actually life-impacting problems, and you might just win them over. Or don't, and people can just keep telling you the obvious. Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Miles Morales is Miles Morales. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.